Hello, it's Thursday. So about 6 months ago, I made Albert. I spent 100 hours painstakingly making what felt like a million feathers. And since then, I keep getting asked the same question. Can we have a pattern? Now look, I would love to give you a pattern for him, but I didn't write one. Sometimes designing is more fun if you're not creating something to be replicated by someone else. And also, some designs are just so basic there's no point writing them down. Which brings us to today. Today I'm not going to show you my owl pattern, I'm going to make you write your own. Okay, so I am going to share a version of my pattern for those of you who would rather I did all the work. But I'm going to focus more on helping you write your own. So first of all, for beginners, don't be scared. As long as you can do your basic crochet stitches and you know how to read a pattern, this video will get you the rest of the way. Now, just as a general disclaimer, I always say it in these kinds of videos, but I don't personally think that there is any wrong way to do things, but I have to start my explanations somewhere. So do keep in mind that this is only just one way to make the shapes that we're going to make today, and that there is a million other ways that you could approach this exact same task. So a finished example of what we're doing today is, I believe he was dubbed Alejandro by you guys, but he was the 10-hour version of the owl that I made. So basically what we're going to do is build up the pieces that we need, and then I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks as to how you can make yours look just that little bit fancier. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about tools and materials. So to make your owl today, I'm going to be using 8-ply 100% acrylic yarn, also known as DK, but you can use whatever yarn you prefer. It just make sure that you're using the same size / weight / gauge of yarn for all of your pieces so that they fit together nicely. I suggest having a main body color, a couple of accent colors, as well as a black, a white, and a yellow. You're also going to need your 3.5mm hook, or a hook that's appropriate for the yarn that you're using, a pair of 20mm safety eyes, but I will show you how to get around that if you don't have any available, pins and needles, scissors, and some stuffing. You may also find it helpful to have stitch markers or a bobby pin available to you if you need one during this process. Now, when designing, I would normally recommend that you take your time and you sketch what you're trying to make. You try and picture it from different angles until you've got a really clear picture in your mind. However, for today's owl, you can be way more freeform and relaxed about it and just let it evolve as we go. So step 1, birds, like everything else, come from eggs. We're going to start by making the body nugget. So the first choice you need to make is to decide how wide you want your owl to be. On the screen now is a guide that basically just helps you grow a wide, flat circle that gets steadily bigger. And you're going to use that guide to make a circle that's as wide as you want your owl to be round. So I'm going to be making mine small for the purposes of filming today. So I'm going to be stopping at row 8 when I am 48 stitches around. But as you can see, I have continued the guide to extremes so you can go nuts. Now you can make a deliberate choice here, or you can just start at the top of the guide and work rows until you have a circle that feels right to you. I do recommend that you don't go any smaller than about 36 stitches around, but that's just because of the size of the rest of the features that we're going to be making. So if you're wondering about why the guide might look a little bit different to how you've done your increases in the past, it's because I've adjusted those increases to encourage a circle shape rather than a hexagon. We are basically making a ball, which means we want 6 increases per row, evenly spaced. But if we line them all up in the same place, we're going to end up forming 6 corners, and we don't really want that. So by staggering those increases every second row, we kind of minimize the appearance of those corners. So now you have a base, which is length and depth, and so now we want to give our owl a little bit of height. To do so, we're going to work basic rows of single crochet around, keeping track of how many that we do. So again, you can make a deliberate choice here, or you can just keep stitching until you're happy with the height. If you're not trying to write down the notes, you don't even have to keep count if you don't want to. Now, you can use a stitch marker or a bobby pin to help you keep count if you don't enjoy counting. I personally find it kind of soothing. One little trick, if you want your owl to be roughly as tall as it is wide, all you have to do is go to the guide and take the row number from the widest row that you did and times it by 2. And that's roughly how many rows tall you should make your owl. So for me, that was row 8. So I would take that 8, double it to 16, and then do 16 rows of 48 single crochet around. So I did want my owl to be a little bit shorter today, so instead I did 15 rows of 48 single crochet around. So I had a bit of a camera meltdown in the middle of that step, and I really don't want to frog my body piece. So I've just whipped up this piece really quickly with the same number of stitches around, just only a couple of rows of height added so I can show you the next step. Hopefully that isn't too confusing. So with your owl at its desired height, we now need to close off the base, which brings us to our decreasing guide. So to do this, you find the row with the total number of stitches in your round, and then you start at the row after it. So my row is 48 stitches around, which matches up to row 12. So row 13 is where I'll start my decreasing. And I'm going to work all the way down to row 19. Now this does include the stuffing reminder after row 18, but feel free to stuff whenever you feel comfortable. Boom, nugget. It's already an owl, we just need to add some stuff to it to remind it of that. So step 2, we are going to build the facial features. So the trick to making this owl look cool is by layering a bunch of really simple pieces on top of each other until they start to look like they're complicated. And we're going to start with the eyes. So the eyes are made up of 3 pieces. You've got your pupil, your iris, and for lack of a better word, I'm going to refer to this as the focus. So we're going to start with the pupil. Now, for my pupils today, I'm going to be using 20mm safety eyes. But if you don't have this size eye available, you can try adapting this pattern to match the size eye that you have, or you can grab your black yarn and just work up 2 little black domes. So you do that just by making a magic ring of 6. Then 6 increases around. And then a row of 12 single crochet. And finish off. They will come out slightly larger than the safety eyes I'm using today, but they'll work just fine. So with our pupils out of the way, that brings us to the iris. So the iris is going to be a circle piece that we make 1 round wider than the pupil, regardless of if you're using safety eyes or crocheted domes. So if you look at our increase guide again, I know that my pupils are roughly 12 single crochet around, which is row 2. So our irises need to go up to row 3 for 18 single crochet around. So as you start your magic ring, do remember that you need to fit the stem of your safety eye through it, so don't pull it too tightly. Now, I'm working my measurements to suit my 20mm safety eyes. If your eyes are larger than that, what you do is you're going to work down the rows of the guide until you have a circle that's the same size as your eye, and then work the next row of the guide, which will give you 1 additional row of increases. So when your iris is the right size, you can choose to finish off. However, I like to add a row of front post stitching around the edge of mine. I think it adds a lot of definition, but it does also up the difficulty level. So if it's too hard, don't worry about it. So I'm going to be working my front post single crochet in the same color as my iris, and just work a front post single crochet for each stitch around. So I'm going to finish off in that color, and then just because I'm a real sucker for punishment, I'm going to grab my black and I'm going to reattach and work a black slip stitch around the post of each of those front post stitches. So those are back post slip stitches. Then I'm going to finish off and actually be done with the piece. So that black row just again adds a lot of real nice definition to this piece. Makes it really pop. And don't worry too much if you've got a messy point where you kind of started and finished your rows. That is going to be tucked up under an eyelid on the finished piece, so we don't have to worry about it too much. So there are my 2 irises, and that is what it will look like with the crocheted eye and the safety eye. So with that, we just have the focus to make. So that brings me to the focus. Now, I know that's not what it's actually called. I don't think it's equivalent to the sclera of our eye. And if there are any ornithologists out there in the comments, because who knows, do feel free to educate me. But we want that focus to be a bigger circle again. So for me, my irises went up to 18 stitches around, which is equivalent to row 3 of our guide. So I want my focus to go up 2 rows larger than that, which brings it to 30 stitches around. So we make these pieces exactly the same way as we made the irises, only bigger. And that includes the row of front post stitching that I'm going to put around the edge, which you can do in a different color or the same color, it's up to you. But once again, that adds both definition and difficulty. So it's a choice you have to make. I am going to skip the black edging for this one here, as I don't think it's necessary. So there are the focuses, the iris and the pupil. So there are my eyes, and we're not done with the faces yet. Pop those to one side. So the next piece of the face that we're going to be making is the beak. So the beak we need for our owl is really just a teardrop shape. And for today, I recommend just making this particular teardrop, which should suit most owls. So you'll note that we start with a round base and then decrease along 2 points along the side. And that's because we want it to be a 3D shape, but we also want it to sit relatively flatly when we go to attach it. And by decreasing along those 2 points consistently through the rows, we're encouraging it to form 2 edges, one on each side, which will help it sit flat. So we can add that to our face. And it's already looking like an owl. So the final piece of the face is the eyebrow. So the eyebrow / eyelid is one of those pieces that we could very easily complicate. But for the purposes of today, we are going to make it in its simplest form possible. And that is a rectangle. It will sit over the top of these eye pieces, and we're going to use it to hide all of our little ends. So I want you to lay out the pieces of your eye stacked up like a little stack of pancakes. And that's because your eye has a lot of depth to it. It doesn't just sit flat. And then I want you to make a chain in your main body color. And I want that chain to touch the side of the table on one side of your eye and then go the whole way across the dome so that it sits flat on the other side of the eye without being stretched. So we're not stretching our chain, but if I hold it on one side and I drape it across the fattest part of the eye, I can see it doesn't reach the other side. So I'm going to keep going. So measure it again. And you want it to touch the table on either side of your eye. So just a relaxed chain across the dome of your eye. So mine works out to be 15 chains. I'm then going to chain 1 as my turning chain, turn and work 15 single crochet back along that base. And I'm going to work 2 to 4 rows like this. I do recommend at least sort of 3 or 4 rows for it, just to build up the width of that rectangle. So just like that. So I've worked 60 stitches in total, which is 4 rows of 15 just back and forth into this little rectangle, which fits very comfortably over the top of the eye. You do want it bigger rather than smaller. So you have one more row here, which again is going to add a feature, but also up your difficulty. And that is, I want you to put a puff stitch in each of those stitches along your eyelid. And that is just going to give him just this most magnificent, like, eye moustache. Now, I don't think I made my puffs all the same size. I think I pulled up loops 4 times on some and 5 times on others. It's not going to matter. And when you reach the end of your puff stitches, just finish off. So you can see how those puff stitches are forcing this into like hyperspace. It's occupying too many dimensions. No, it's just making it curve slightly unusually. And we're going to want 2 such eyebrows, and we will be fitting them over the eye and up the face. So you'll see by just making that measurement, the sort of the dome of the eye to start with, it's given us the perfect length to curve up the head as well. Oh my, the disapproval on this fellow. Anyway, move that all off to one side. So step 3 is adding a couple of body features to our egg so that we can then start like layering up that face and getting a feel for what it's going to end up looking like. So pointy heads and owls kind of just go together in my mind, and the easiest way to add ears or like horns or tufts is using cones. And I say cones, but what I technically mean is triangular pyramids, because we want to start at a point and then grow it out evenly at 3 distinct places. So here I have my cone increasing guide. And what I suggest this time is, rather than starting with a set idea, is start at the top of the guide and just work each row, trying it on your owl at the end of each row to see what it fits like. So unlike when we were making a round, for this piece we do want to encourage 3 distinct corners to form, which is why those increases aren't staggered. We want to increase in roughly the same place in each row. So it's 15 around, still looking a little funny to me. Okay, so at 18 I'm getting close, but I think I'm going to go 1 more row. And I think I like that size there, so that is 21 stitches around the base, and then finish off. So you're going to want to make 2 of those. So we're now going to work on a little bit of assembly. And we're just going to take a moment now and just pin the pieces we have in place on our body so that you can get a feel for the owl you're making. Now, if you're ever dealing with a roly-poly piece that's now sitting very obediently in an obnoxious fashion, what you can just do is go to the underside, poke your pins in a little bit of a square, and that should help it sit a little bit more stably. Yeah. So we are going to start with our beak, and we're going to pin it pretty close to the top of the head, a few rows down, and just kind of like pin it very loosely in place for now. We might need to wiggle it around a little bit later. We're then going to grab the largest pieces of our eyes, and with the messiest bit on top, to where it will be covered by the eyelid later, you want to squeeze those in as close as you can to the beak on either side. Again, just a couple of pins to help them stay in place for now. They might move again in future. Then we're going to grab our little iris and pupil combination, which I haven't actually snapped together yet, but you could if you wanted to at this point. Please remember that your pupils should go in the middle of your irises, but your irises don't have to go in the middle of the focus. So you can have him looking any way you like. And for me today, I'm going to pin those irises against the upper beak so that they're together in the middle. I think owls should be cranky and slightly cross-eyed. That's what our little bird brain currently looks like. But then going to grab our horns, not our eyelids. So the horns go on under the eyelids. And I'm just going to line them up on the outer edge of our eye there. So the flat side is at the top and the pointy side is facing down the body. I know that there's 3 pointy bits, but I think you know what I mean. There's one, and the other one goes over here. Okay, so here's kind of where the magic happens. We're going to grab one of our eyelid pieces and pin one of our short edges down to the inside edge of one of our eyes, just above where the beak is. Then we're going to fold it over the top of the eye. Pin down on the other side. So that's what we've got our eye looking like. Then we just have to kind of resolve what the end of it's doing with the horn. Now you can just choose to like wrap it around like so, but for me, I'm going to choose to move my horn out a little bit so that it lines up with the tip of that eyebrow. So look there. So now I can pin the end of that eyebrow to the tip of the horn, and it's all looking like I did it on purpose. I mean, of course I did it on purpose. So I'm going to do the same thing with the eyelid on the other side. So take one of our short ends, pin it down the edge of the eye. Running out of pins here. Drape it across the eye. And I'm going to have to move that horn as well, so I'll just take that off now. Pin it in place on the other side. Just shuffle that horn into position. So that's what he's looking like from above, but that's his face. How good is that? So grouchy. Many hoots. So we're not done actually making pieces for him yet. I just wanted to stop and assemble the face so that you could get a feel for the process we're making, because after making just a bunch of circles, I could see some of you starting to like question what I was telling you, but hopefully now I've converted some of you into believers, now that you've got this guy to judge you from a corner. Anywho, so next up we're going to make him a little belly piece. Now we could have done this using color changes on our base piece, but also why would we fuss around with that when we can just so easily make a flat round or a flat square and just sew it on, and it gives you a nicer definition and it's way easier to customize. So a round patch is really easy. I've already shown you the round increasing guide. Just work up a circle if you want to do it that way. But what if you wanted a rectangular tummy patch? So what you do is you take your total number of stitches in the widest part of your round, which for me was 48. Then I'm going to divide that by 4, which gets me to 12. And you might need to round up to the nearest whole number. So if it's like a 10.5, for example, you'd round to 11. For me, it's 12. So I'm going to chain 12. And that's going to be the width of our little tummy piece. I'm then going to make one additional chain, which acts as my turning chain. I'm going to turn, starting in the second chain from my hook. I'm going to work rows of 12 single crochet back and forth to build up a rectangle. And I want you to keep working those rows until your belly piece reaches from the base of your owl up to 2 to 3 rows below where your eyes are sitting. And if you're feeling really fancy with it, once you're at your final row, do a decrease at the start of that row and at the end of that row to give it just a slightly rounded off look. It's very slight. And so that will fit over his little tum, just like that. Which brings us finally to his limbs. So step 4 is limbs, and that means we're making wings, tail, and feet. So just like with the face, the wings and the tail are going to be assembled from some very basic pieces to make them look more complicated. So for the wings, we're going to need a round that forms the base of the wing, some ruffles, and some feathers. So the main meaty part of the wing is the round. So that main meaty part of the wing is the round. And I want you to use our increase guide to make a circle that is roughly the same size as your focus. Depending on how big or small you made the body, you may need to adjust this wing size up or down a little bit, but you want to make sure that that round piece just fits comfortably on the side of your owl and it isn't like crammed in there. So I've gone with 24 stitches around, just because that seems like the amount of space I have on my side. Note that I don't want to like crowd mine too much, but that's just a personal preference thing. So once you have your circle at the right size, I want you to add 1 to 2 rows of single crochet around the edge just to give it a little bit of height. So smaller wings will probably only need 1 row, but larger wings you might want to add 2, maybe even 3 if you've gone like way out there. So I've gone for just 1 row because my wing's quite small. The rounder your wing is, the wider you probably want it to be as well. So I'm going to finish that off. So now we have the rounds of our wing. We want to decorate them a little bit to disguise the fact that we've just used a circle. And that brings us to our ruffles. So I'm going to make ruffles today in 2 different sizes. I'm going to make a 2 ruffle and a 3 ruffle.
And I'm going to make one of each for each wing.
So I'm going to start with the smaller ruffle. So what I do is I chain 4 for each fan I want to exist in the ruffle. So for the 2 ruffle, I would chain 4 and then 4, so that's 8. And then I chain 1 additional one. So it doesn't matter if I'm doing 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, chain an extra 1.
Then I'm going to work 5 double crochet into the 3rd chain from my hook. I'm then going to skip a chain and slip stitch into the next one. Then skip a chain and work 6 into the next chain. Skip a chain and slip stitch into what should be the last chain in your row. So there is my 2 feather ruffle. You note that all it really needs is a chain of 4 chains for each feather that you're doing in your ruffle, plus 1 to sort of get you started. So this is the 2 chain, and now I'm going to create a 3 chain applying the same principle. So my 3 chain needs to have 3 feathers, so that's 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 to get me started is 13. So then 6 double crochet in the 3rd chain from our hook for our first one. And then it's just a matter of skip 1, slip stitch, skip 1, 6 double crochet. Skip 1, slip stitch, skip 1, 6 double crochet, skip 1 and slip stitch to finish the row. So you can create these ruffles at any length that you need for your particular owl, but for mine 1 3 and 1 2 will work for each wing. So then when we assemble, I'm going to line the 2 up on the outer edge and then the 3 up over the top to make it blend with the rest of the wing. So the next step is just to create a couple of little feathers. All of these details are optional, of course, but it's just about layering up simple pieces until people think you've done something really fancy and amazing. So we're going to make as few of these individual feathers as we can get away with. They're a really simple piece, but I made enough in November that I'm still full, you know, I've had enough feathers.
So to make, feathers are just so easy. We're going to start by chaining 7.
Now you can actually change the length of your feather by just changing the length of this starting chain, but we're going to start with a 7 feather.
And then we're going to chain 1 and turn. So starting in our 2nd chain from hook, you are then going to work 6 single crochet across the top of the chain. Then 5 single crochet all in the final chain to turn our work. And then 6 single crochet back up the bottom side of the chain.
And finish off.
So there we have a feather that is 7 chains long, and you can make them in a couple of different sizes. So for my wings today, I'm going to make one that's a 7 chain, one a 6 chain, a 5 chain, and a 4 chain. However, for each wing, you could just make 4 feathers the exact same size, and just when you go to sew them on, tuck more of each feather underneath to create the same sloping effect if you don't like working with super tiny pieces.
Then when I attach them, I'll do it in a little fan to make it look fancy. At least I make myself laugh. I mean, that's the important bit. Oof, I am going to try really hard to not let it bother me that I've attached the feathers sloping in the wrong direction on my 10-hour owl. I'm going to blame the fact that I was working to a really, like a timer, and that stresses me out. So I have to say that so far I can tell from my camera that it's taken me 2 hours to get to this point, so I don't know what I was doing for the other 8. Right, so there is the wing, and I will do the same on the other side.
So then we're making the tail. Now, the tail is just going to consist of 1 ruffle. And for owls the same size as mine, you probably only need a 3 ruffle, but if you do need to make a larger tail, you can work it by layering up the pieces we've already made, or you can make a 5 ruffle, 7 ruffle, a 9 ruffle. I would suggest keeping it an odd number just because that always seems to look a little bit nicer when it comes to tails.
So basically I'm just going to make another 3 ruffle piece, just the same as we made for the wings.
So then we just need a piece to hide our edge and like blend it in with the body. So to do that, we're just going to create another round piece. It's going to be the same color as your body and about the same size as your iris, just without any of the fancy stitches around the edges. The only important thing to note about this circle is it needs to be big enough to cover the edges of any feathers you're attaching to your tail when it's all sort of laid out how you want it to sit on your owl.
And I think 3 rows up to 18 stitches around is going to be plenty in this instance to create our little tail. Okay, so with both wings and the tail done now, I've run out of pins for the moment, please just bear with me. We have one final piece to make.
So that brings us to feet. Now, are feet necessary? No. Are we still going to make them? Yes. So feet can help, not unlike literal feet, are going to help your owl balance, and they're going to tip it back slightly so it has just a better angle for viewing, because otherwise the features of the face can kind of weigh it forward a little bit. However, we don't have to make feet a super complex shape. All we have to do is make a couple of little tubes.
So I'm going to grab the same color that I used to make my beak, just keep all of those bits in the same color, and all we're going to do for these feet is make a magic ring of 6. Like so, and then work rows of 6 single crochet around until you have a little tube that's about 1 inch long. There we go. So I've done 5 rows of 6 single crochet, that's not including the magic ring, but if you had a wider base, you might want to keep going and make yours a little bit longer just to add that little bit of stability. But this is enough for me, so I'm going to finish off.
Now, if you're making a large owl, you're going to need to use your own judgment here about whether or not you need to make these little sausages a little bit longer, but they shouldn't need to be much wider.
I'll tuck these strands down inside. And just close off this opening by taking our tail and pulling it through the front loops only of each of the stitches around. And tuck the end away inside. So there is our first little sausage, and I want you to make 4 in total so that they look a little bit like that. So then when it comes time to attach them, they'll be attached in 2 pairs of 2, so 1 on either side of the body, like that. And then when he's sitting, you'll see the 2 little toes sticking out, and you won't even be able to tell for a second that they're not fancy Y shapes, and they are in fact just 2 little sausages.
Which brings us to assembly, specifically sewing. Now, I know you don't like sewing, okay? However, it's one of those trade-offs that you have to make where we can make really complicated shapes and not have to sew as much, or we can make really basic shapes and have to sew them a lot. Most of the time we try to aim for somewhere in the middle of that.
I mean, look at this. We've made it basically a series of circles, rectangles, and like a couple of little frilly bits, and it adds up to that really cool looking owl, and the only price we have to pay for that is we have to sew all of these pieces on. And there's only 31 of them. That's not even that many. But before we do that, we're actually going to make a few small changes to some of these pieces. So I'm going to pop most of this to one side, but what I'm going to keep are my eye pieces, my belly piece, and my feet. So all three of these features can really benefit from just a little bit of extra stitching to really kind of enhance their details. So I'm going to start with this belly piece. So all I've done is thread a yarn needle, so plastic darning needle, with some of my body color.
And I'm just going to weave that yarn in and out of those stitch gaps so that you're just seeing that color peek through. So I've used this technique before to add like spots and stripes to lizards and that kind of thing. But what I've found is that it's great for helping you build a gradient. It's great for helping you blend colors together. And it just changes up the texture of the piece that little bit to make it a little bit more interesting.
So just like that. So that is our new belly piece. And when it goes back onto our owl, it'll just look a little bit more like it belongs.
So then we're going to move on to these claws. So I know I've gone from the middle one to the side and then to the other side, and then I'll like come back and do the eyes, but just like go with it. We're going with the creative flow today. So for each of these toes, I'm going to grab my black and I'm just going to stitch a little black patch on the tip of all four of them. And that's just going to give the illusion of having some kind of like claw. Or talon? Talon. We're using words for things.
Just like that. Only, you know, on all four of them. There we go for little burnt French fries. Which brings us, of course, to the eyes. Now the eyes already have a lot going on, so I can already feel you wondering, like, what are we going to do to them? But if you look back at our inspo piece here, you can see that the eyes have this little long stitch technique. That's, again, just working to change the texture of what we're looking at. So how we get that effect, what we're going to do is line your eye up where it's going to go when it's attached, making sure that your like bad sides are facing the right way and all that jazz. And then I'm going to take a couple of pins and just pin these two pieces together. Just has to be rough, doesn't have to be like fully locked in permanent, but be aware that you're going to do some stitch detailing on the bit that you can see. So it is kind of permanent. So there we go, there is one of the eyes. And so this white crescent here is the bit that we're going to fill in with some of that stitching. So I'm going to once again work in my, it's like an off-white or cream color. And I'm just going to work long stitches from the edge of the focus to just under the edge of the iris. I always block out the angle for my stitches first and then fill them in. So I did one little line there, I'm doing one line here. One line across like this really big wide bit. And these will act as my guide. And then I can just go along and fill it in between and not worry too much about slanting off at the wrong angle. Right, so with those 5 guidelines in place, I can now unpin this and stop stabbing myself. There we go, which leaves me the guidelines and the room to fill them in. So that's what I'm just going to do now. So in this situation, having done the front post single crochet around the edge makes maintaining that even border significantly easier. And that's how it'll look once we attach our eye. It just makes it a little bit more fancy. And for 5 or 10 minutes work, I think it makes a huge difference on the final appearance of your owl.
So now that we've done that, we're going to assemble the wings. Now, depending on what pieces you've made, your assembly might look a little different. This is just how I'm going to do mine. So I'm going to line my 2 ruffle up on the edge of the round so that it covers my finishing off point and stitch it in place. Then I'm going to grab my 3 ruffle and I'm going to pin that across the round so that it covers the edge where the smaller ruffle attaches to the wing. I also aim for all of the fans to be visible. And I sew that on as well. I'm using my accent colour to sew here as it will show up as little flecks of purple on the blue, and I really like that effect for feathers.
I'm then going to line my feathers up from biggest to smallest and pin them to the underside of the wing. I stitch them onto both the ruffle they are under and the round if they reach that far. And when we attach this to the owl later, each of these feathers will also be sewn down to the body itself, so don't worry too much if you don't feel like they're secure. With both wings assembled, we grab our tail next. So I line my ruffle up with the edge of my circle piece so that the edge is tucked away underneath. I then stitch it on just as I did with the wings. Finally, if you haven't already, stitch the pupils of your eyes to the largest piece, making sure your rough edges are all at the top of the eye where they'll be covered by the eyelid. And just like that, we have halved our pieces down to 16.
Now, there are only 2 real tricks that I can share with you regarding making sewing look better. And I'm going to use the term trick very, very loosely there. Both of these I can show you when it comes to sewing on the belly to your owl. So trick 1 is line up your stitches wherever possible. Because we're attaching a square piece to rows that are running parallel with that square piece, this is a really easy piece to line up. So you'll see there that I've got it in line with the existing stitches on the body of the owl. So that's trick 1. By lining up those stitches, you're going to make the 2 pieces almost melt into each other so that it's not as obvious that they were separate. So trick 2, I've mentioned so many times in so many videos, and that is only ever work your needle into the gaps between the stitches. Don't stab into the little squares, stab between the gaps between them. And if you need help kind of remembering to do this, use a yarn needle, because it will not be sharp enough to puncture your actual stitches, and it will only work in the gaps, and it kind of enforces that discipline. So for the sake of being a good sport today, I am going to attach my belly piece using a yarn needle. So you'll see there that I am lining up each stitch with the stitch that's next to it in the row, and on both the belly piece and the body, I am just working my needle up through the gap on the belly and then down into the gap of the body. And I'm doing it every single stitch around, matching them up, lining them up, trying to make it as smooth and nice as possible.
So there is the belly fully attached. We are now going to pin our horns back in place, and if you need to, you should pin the whole face on again, just to make sure that they're positioned correctly.
So this process can look a little bit trickier when you don't have a nice square piece going in line with your rows, and I think that the ear tufts on top are a good example of that. So you'll note that we've got it sitting at an angle. It doesn't really line up with the stitches nicely, but you can still use both of these tricks. In this case, lining up your stitches literally just means try and match your stitch 1 to 1 with the stitches around it, working in between the gaps of the stitches closest to where you want your finished piece to sit. And I'm hoping that the visual example of this expresses more than I seem to be able to adequately do with words. Just take your time, try and match your stitches up, going up through the piece you're trying to attach, down into the body. And you'll note that I'm leaving one of those sides open, just tuck a little stuffing into, and then just closing it off the rest of the way. So the whole point of it is just trying to make it all look like it was one piece to begin with. And then we never had to sculpt it from crochet in the first place. We can just make the easier pieces and sew them together. And I think that we got a pretty nice join on both of those.
Next we're going to sew on the face. So we build it up in layers, first sewing on the eyes and then the eyebrows. You can pin the beak and feet on at the same time because we're going to use yellow to sew both on. The feet, you just pin them as a pair of sausages on either side of the body and make sure your birdie can balance before you sew them on. Okay, alright, you're cute. You're cute, you can stay. Finally, pin your wings on either side of his body, paying attention to which way the feathers slope. You can pin the tail into position at the same time. Use your body colour to secure the armpit/shoulder part of the wing, and then the base of the tail. Then you swap to some of your accent colour and just tack down the ends of your wing feathers so they sit how they're supposed to. This is how much of that blue yarn I have left. Well, that and like a couple of little scraps. So we yarn chickening all the way.
So there is your finished owl. So comparatively, this guy only took me like 4 or 5 hours compared to the 10 that I put into him, but I actually think that the end result is a lot similar. The extra hours kind of went into the additional planning and shaping and designing. When we went to make this guy, it was a lot faster because I already knew what we were going to make, if that makes sense. I'm kind of waffling. Let's try and focus. So this guy here is a lot simpler than what I did for the 10-hour owl, but I actually think that in the end result, you wouldn't really be able to tell. And what you have here is something that you could actually make conceivably for a market stall, whereas this guy here, the markup on the number of hours that go into him, it's just not worth it. I hope you had fun kind of designing your own today. It was kind of a nice break to try and film something a little bit differently and not have to just sit there and like increase single crochet, but instead kind of hand that creative process back to you guys. So I hope you had fun kind of trying that out. I don't know how often we'll do anything like this, but it was definitely fun to try for today. And hopefully that finally closes the book on people asking for the owl pattern, because if I had it, I would give it to you. You know me, I'm a pushover. I'm easily bullied into doing things like that. But yeah, that's it for this week. Okay, bye.